Hi everyone, welcome to today's lesson. We're going to be carrying on with this pencil portrait project today. We've got a pretty good foundation from the first three lessons. So if you remember rightly, we began with our general block-in of the proportions of the head and shapes of the shadows, the darker shapes. The second lesson we created some variety in those shadows, and then last lesson, which was the third one, we blocked in our halftones. So far everything's been fairly roughly placed in, and you could kind of finish a sketch at this point. It depends on the sort of finish you're going for. We're going to try to finish this to a reasonable degree of kind of rendering. So we've got a couple more sessions we're going to spend on it, probably two, this being the penultimate one. And this lesson we're going to be just developing these forms, so developing some of the what I would call medium-sized forms. So we've got all the general forms and we've got a suggestion of medium forms through the halftones. We're going to be doing things like finding the specific shape of the cheek or the eyelid, the brow, the forehead, those sorts of things, but not getting into any kind of details in terms of, say, specific textures of shininess in the lips or the nose, eyelashes, those sorts of things, specific portions of the hair. Shapes of the ear, that kind of thing. We're not going to work on those just yet. They're going to be next lesson, which will be our kind of final finishing session where we kind of render everything and finish everything off. So yeah, this week we're just going to be working on medium forms, which are kind of things I guess as big as a cheek or a chin is something like a medium form, and then smaller forms would be things like the flare of the nostril. Eyes are kind of in between. The general eye shape is perhaps a medium form, and then the specifics of the eyelids are perhaps more small forms, but it kind of varies. I'll probably spend a bit of time on the eyes, I think, working with almost small forms today, because I want to get into things like the specifics of the pupils and the iris and the eyelashes next week. So we can get started, and I think probably what I'd like to start with initially is just working in the form of this cheek. So we've already got it fairly well established. I'm working with my one of my smaller mechanical pencils. So by this stage, if you're working with mechanical pencils, you're probably going to be using your finer points. If you're working with regular pencils, you're going to want to be sharpening quite a lot. Because going for this level of finish, you do need quite a small point. So we're going in and using, it's going to be a bit patchy because we've just been hatching over so far, but if we want to really render it, we're going to need to go in and fill these smaller little patches. So what I do when I'm working like this is I kind of blur my eyes and I think about what kind of form I'm trying to create, how much am I trying to round out this form. So rounding out is caused by creating a more subtle gradient between these two values. So we've got a darker value and a medium value. And as I create a more gradual transition, that's going to increase the sense of roundness in this cheek. So you see that starting to happen now. But as I do that, the most efficient way to work is to even out, where necessary, even out your tones at the same time as adding form. So I can look at this patchiness and I can add value by filling in any of the lighter patches within a patchy area, if that makes sense. So I'm both evening out and darkening. And if necessary, you can even out and lighten. So if I said this is a bit too dark and patchy, I pick the darker points, the darker patches inside that lighter section, and I erase them. can also use this opportunity to start to neaten up, clean up your edges. So primarily you can see what I'm doing here is just softening transitions and evening out tones. I'm working quite lightly over the surface, so I'm not pressing too hard. I want time that I can kind of float over the surface, press where necessary, but lighten off where necessary as well. The main risk would be adding kind of too much tone too quickly and then having to go back and correct, and I don't want to do that. I want to make my drawing as efficient as possible. I'm not going to add too much specific detail on that lip, we'll be doing that next lesson. So in addition to evening out, you're also making adjustments again to value. So I'm lightening something there that I darkened too much, so it's kind of a push and pull. But if you work gradually, you'll have time to make those sorts of corrections. Another thing to think about in these more kind of subtle final stages of your drawing, things like lost and found, which is a concept I've probably spoken about before. So places where different parts of the drawing meet where the values are the same. So the eyebrow is darker generally than the skin in this portrait, but at this point here they kind of just merge, they're about the same value, so you don't need to make any kind of adjustment to try to insist that the eyebrow is different. You can just make it darker because make them the same value as each other, because that's what they're doing in reality as well, and that can add a lot of reality to your drawings. So try to look out for lost and found where possible. I'm not going to get too bogged down in these eyes. I'm just trying to generally give a sense of how the brow loops up, kind of loops up this way. Can move up to the forehead now, start to soften these edges off. Trying to ease off getting too bogged down in any given section, because next week is going to be our finishing week. Each stage is just kind of laying a platform for what's going to come next. And it's good to build the drawing up kind of evenly as much as possible. So I don't want to kind of move too far ahead with detail, as we can add that next week. You can of course choose to leave certain portions more rendered or less rendered than others. Which is a very good way of kind of controlling how the viewer looks at the drawing. It's kind of a compositional choice that you can make, and something I'll often do in my work. In this case, I just want to kind of create an example of something that's quite fairly detail, has a fairly kind of even detail rendering. take a moment to stop and just have a look at how things are going. So it's coming along fairly well. The more that you've established things effectively at the beginning of the drawing, the easier you'll find this stage. If everything already kind of roughly works, you're really just kind of evening things out and smoothing transitions where necessary. Don't smooth everything evenly. There are going to be certain points that are softer than others or harder, and that's what gives a lot of variety and interest to a drawing. You don't want to kind of make everything exactly the same sort of rendering, because it becomes too generalized that way. So I've just gone in and removed a lot of tone. That was a little bit too dark, that section. So don't worry about doing stuff like that at this point as well. You can still make major corrections. All the way through the drawing you can make major corrections, or if you're painting you can make corrections as well. It's more important that you correct things and make them how you want them to be than you save time or, you know. But the more accurate you can be early on, the faster this stage will be and the more enjoyable it'll be as well. I'm going to get 2 into these small forms, so I'll leave that as it is. Getting near the end of this session, for just a few more minutes. I'm pretty happy generally with how everything's blocked in, how all the different forms are turning. As I say, it's just subtle adjustments we've made. We're going to be even more subtle next week when we get into the final details. Pretty much there, I think. A lot of these things I'm starting to work on now, I'd say, are kind of creeping into smaller forms. And I don't want to do that, as I say. I want to stick just with medium forms for this week. But we're definitely at a good point now. To finish stuff off next week. But I'm really happy with the kind of the level of detail that we're at with this point. It shouldn't be too much work to get things to a finish next week. But yeah, that's it. As always, if you guys want to watch the previous videos, you can check out our YouTube channel. There's 3 in this series already before this one. And if you want to check out the link through to the website, you can sign up for to the OCAD course, and you'll get access to tutorials with myself and other teachers in various specialties. Feedback on work that you've done relating to previous lessons. So it's really good. I recommend checking it out. But yeah, that's it, and I'll see you guys next week.